This is vk3sl playing radio in the afternoon mission sessions on 160 metres in the narrowband FM mode. So yeah, we've got a program of assorted test material, all modulated sound of course, that's the way we do things here, and we invite people to partake. So there are different ways we can do this. One is to listen on 160 metres on 1868 kilohertz in the narrowband FM mode, and another way is to listen on the streaming service. I think I've got the main streaming service going again. It's been problematic of late. Had to work with a dynamic IP address, all sorts of boring stuff, but eventually got there, and I think we are set there. And there is the new streaming service. This is the new sort of go-to place for these missions now, and that's on YouTube and streaming under my call sign. Name of the channel, vk3sl. So you can find it there. And there's a bit of an archive, a log of previous afternoon programs, as well as the late night Friday sessions as well, or test material, of course. So yeah, where are we tonight? Well, not a lot to report really. A few technical sort of developments, well not really developments, but a few repairs along the way. We have a log of backlog actually of things that need to be done. Slowly getting through them. But busy day at the family coalface today. Back to the taxi service again, folks. This is what's happening. We're moving out of the corona zone, or maybe we're moving back in. Sort of hope we do in a way, so I can get my time back. Yes, all of the kids' sport things and everything's starting up again. It's going crazy. Yes, taxi service. Anyhow, we will persevere, and what we'll find is something a bit inspirational from last night. And I should say that we did have a quite an enjoyable, very enjoyable session last night. It was great fun. We had Frank on board, and he's hopefully going to be a regular now on the late night Friday missions from midnight or from 12:30 onwards. I'll do the first hour, and then we'll work together with a range and assortment of mostly nostalgia-related historic material. That seems to be the main focus. So yeah, it was really, really good to have Frank with us last night. So yeah, we'll hopefully continue along that path with using Talkie as our sort of, not Talkie, I think we're using Zoom last night. So yeah, I've got a note in the log to try and balance Zoom a little bit better, but that's work in progress too. Enough rambling. What have we got? One of the points of inspiration last night was a recording of Marjorie Stetford and a song called Black Coffee, and it features Mr. DeBrois Summers and his boyfriends from 1935, and it's just such a good song. I've got to play it again. vk3sl.
I'm in trouble, black coffee, I see double, ooh, 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 how am I gonna get home? Black coffee, I'm so dizzy, black coffee, please get busy, ooh, 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 help me so I can get home. Had a little too much hoopy soup, all I meant to take was one, now my head is going loopy-loop. Some stuff, hey kid, what fun, oh, black coffee, help a fella, black coffee, what'll I tell her? Ooh, 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 I'm afraid to go home.
The voice you'd love to hear is what she was billed as. That was Marjorie Stedford with Carol Gibbons and his boyfriends. Did I say Du Bois Summers? I hope I didn't. Anyhow, that was Marjorie Stedford, Australian artist, born in Melbourne, went to London, had a really meteoric career, amazing career. And it says he became a very successful artist and soon had a regular slot in Arthur Askey's show on Radio Luxembourg, described in publicity material as the voice you'd love to hear. Now, it says, unfortunately, the onset of World War II broke her career, and Marjorie went home to Australia, where she married and had a son and occasionally performed as a radio singer. So we're hoping to source some of her Australian material. There's some really interesting stuff in Mr. J's collection. I'm sure we'll organise to hear some of that at some point. I'd like to follow the Marjorie Stedford story. She's a really interesting artist. Okay, this is vk3sl test missions on 160 metres afternoon session or dinner time session, however you'd like to look at it. And as per usual, we play an associated recording program service transcription record. We have a collection of these here, and they yearn to be played, and they're weird and wonderful material, which was used for sort of incidental program material for radio stations, and all the players were contracted outside their normal obligations, so they all worked under pseudonym. So it's an interesting story in itself. Now, I have no idea who this group is, but it's something quite different and not in our usual pass band. We're going to hear the Rodeo Players, I think they're called. So sort of hillbilly music, but it is in hi-fi and it is from the 1930s, so I think that in itself is a good reason to...
This is a test transmission from vk3sl.
Thank you very much.
That nearly everybody knows. So grab your partners and let's have a good old-fashioned square dance. Turn 'em loose, boys. So what about trying another one? Them golden slippers. Turn 'em loose, boy.
slippers, oh, them golden slippers, that's wine where Casey looks so neat. Oh, them golden slippers, oh, them golden slippers, that's wine where the walk golden street. Well, Bill.
Well, that caught me by surprise. Yeah, that was the Rodeo Range Ramblers on a Vitatone with, I don't know, square dance selections, hillbilly selections, as it was back in the early 1930s. I'm fascinated with these records because they are full frequency range recordings, and they embrace the latest technology of the time, and they sound amazing. Hill and Dale records, incidentally, they require a different pickup wiring. You have to wire things out of phase, but they sound surprisingly good. So yeah, that's a part of the matrix. Well, what have we got? We have another thing whereby we have been playing different interpretations of Mozart's Symphony No. 41, his Jupiter, a work that completely overwhelms me, and I just have to listen to it a lot because it sort of is a life force, and Mozart was on fire when he wrote this. It's superhuman music. What happens here musically is beyond description. I've tried to describe it and it just sounds ridiculous, so no point. We'll just listen to it. It's great music. It's the end of his life. Mozart, what may have he done if he had only lived on past, 36 or 37 when he passed away. Anyhow, this is the last movement. We'll hear a version now from Celibidache and the RIA Orchestra in Milan in 1960, another historic recording of the Mozart. vk3sl testing. triumphant was that. Amazing. Mr. Celibidache playing or conducting the music of Mozart. His Symphony Number 41, K551, the final movement. It's like having a blood transfusion hearing that. Such wonderful music. All right, we move on. Now, what else? There is something else. One of the good things about these missions is that it provides me with opportunities to listen to new things, and there's just so much a rich array of new material up online, and every day there are new things I just so want to listen to. So I sort of profile them a little bit and then slot them in the program. So I'm keen to hear this. I sampled it and it blew my socks off. It's a great recording of the Bach's Brandenburg Concerto No. 2, one I'd never heard before, with Anthony Bernard at least, and Leon Goossens on the oboe. So this goes back to the 20s. I think it was recorded about 1928, 29. And who else is on it? It's got Goossens on the oboe, Kushner on the violin, and Mr. Dolmetsch, one of the famous Dolmetschers, playing the harpsichord, and it's the London Chamber Music with Anthony Bernard. So let's have a listen, and if it meets the if it lives up to what I've just heard sampled, it will be quite an experience. And of course, there's nothing like hearing great romantic interpretations of Baroque music. I make no apology for that. vk3sl testing.
is a test transmission from vk3sl.
Yeah, not too many recordings of the Brandenburgs from the 20s. That's from 1928. And it was Anthony Bernard and Leon Goossens with Brandenburg Concerto Number 2. And wow, it's great. It's good to hear these interpretations. You just don't hear them anywhere else except for dinner missions and late night missions. This is the only place where they get a pseudo-public airing. So yes, that's my little bit of mythology there. All right, we will have a listen to something completely different now. We'll move on, and another of Leonard Bernstein's Omnibus series. And this one's entitled The World of Jazz. So I reckon this sounds quite interesting as well. His take on some of the antecedents and some of the structural elements of jazz music, syncopated music, and Bernstein, in his inimitable fashion, gives us the rap. This is vk3sl testing.
I don't suppose that anybody who heard Leonard Bernstein one Sunday afternoon last year will forget how he took the notebooks of Beethoven and made the Fifth Symphony come singing up from the page. Well, he's a very versatile as well as an ardent musician, and it will be no surprise to his friends to hear that this afternoon he's going to take the leap from Beethoven to the 12-bar blues. That's no surprise, because that's what this boy has been doing all his life, who was born in Lawrence, Massachusetts, skipped through school, Harvard, the Curtis Musical Institute, became a protege of Koussevitzky, and in his early 20s was writing symphonies, concertos, jazz ballets, 2 musical comedies, and last year the exciting score for the movie On the Waterfront. I won't go on about his training because it comes out in everything he does, and since he is the most articulate composer and performer and conductor around, I need do no more than turn you over to Leonard Bernstein and his World of Jazz.
What you're hearing is a riff, which in jazz talk means a repeated rhythmic figuration. This riff I have used as a main theme in a composition called Prelude, Fugue, and Riffs, which we're going to play for you a little later. But first, we're going to try to investigate jazz itself as music, rather than following the usual historical approach of up the river from New Orleans, Kansas City, Chicago, and all the rest of it. We're going to try to look at the very innards of jazz and find out once and for all what it is that distinguishes it from all other music. Jazz is a very big word, covers a multitude of sounds, from the earliest blues.
Good morning, blues. Blues, how do you do?
To Dixieland bands. To Charleston bands. To swing bands in the 30s. All the way to boogie woogie. From there to crazy bop. And cool bop. To the mambo. And all the rest of them. It is all jazz, and I love it all. I love it because it is a natural expression of my times and my country. Like this country, it is frank, open, uninhibited in its expression. I also love it for its humor. Jazz really plays around with notes in a way that other music doesn't always. We use the word play to refer to tennis and football usually, but jazz has some of this sporting connotation of the word play. Jazz really fools around with notes. It has fun with it. It's entertainment in the truest sense. But the thing I like best about jazz is that it's such an original form of expression. It's unique in that it is never completely sad or completely happy. For instance, even the deepest blues always has some quality of robustness or a hard-boiled quality that keeps it from being sticky sentimental, no matter how self-pitying the words may be.
I feel so bad, I just can't help but cry. I feel so bad, I just can't help but cry. When I woke up this morning, I had a big black eye.
And then, on the other hand, even the wildest, gayest jazz always seems to have some hint of pain in it. Listen to this trumpet, and you'll see what I mean. But then I find that I always have to defend jazz against people, for example, who say that it's low class. Well, all music is low class in its origins, since all music comes from folk music, and folk music comes from the earth. There has always been a certain shadow of indignity surrounding music and the players of music. This is historically true. It's always gone on. But it's especially true of jazz now, which is almost completely a player's art, depending as it does on improvisation rather than on composition. Then I have to defend jazz against those who say it's loud. Well, of course it's loud, but then so are Sousa marches, and we never hear complaints against Sousa marches. But the main argument against jazz is that it's not art. I think it is an art, and a very special one. But before we can argue about whether it is or not, I think we have to know what it is. And so I propose to share with you some of the things I know and love about jazz. Now let's take that blues we were listening to and find out what it's made of. Now, what are the elements that make that jazz? Well, first of all, there is the element of melody. Western music is in general based melodically on scales, the major scale, the minor scale, and others we won't go into. But there's a special scale for jazz, which is a variation of the regular major scale you all practiced as kids. Now, in jazz, this scale gets modified in three ways. First of all, the third note gets lowered or flatted and becomes this note. The same thing happens to the fifth note, which gets flatted in the same way, and the same thing again happens to the seventh note. So these three notes have now become these three notes, and they are referred to in the trade as blue notes. Now, if we had a fragment of music that was written in the regular notes of the major scale that went, for example, like this, and we applied to this the blue notes of the jazz scale, we would get, which would begin to have a kind of jazzy quality. But this is an important point. The so-called jazz scale is used only melodically, that is, in the tune. In the harmony underneath, we still use our old unflatted notes against the flatted note in the tune. So that causes a dissonance to happen between the E flat in the tune and the E natural in the harmony. It's an unpleasant sound, but this dissonance actually has a remarkable jazz quality. Jazz pianists are always using this dissonance. I'm sure it sounds familiar to you. And there's a reason for it. It's because they are looking for a note that isn't actually there, but which lies somewhere between the two. This is called a quarter tone. The quarter tone comes to us from Africa, which is, after all, the cradle of jazz, and where quarter tones are everyday stuff. We can produce one with the voice or with a wind instrument or with a stringed instrument, but on the piano we have to approximate it by playing those two dissonant notes together. We are playing the two notes that lie on either side of the quarter tone. The real note is somewhere in there, in that crack. Now let's see if I can sing you a quarter tone, if you will pardon my horrifying voice. Here is a little African tune I once heard in Tunis, and the last note of it is going to be a quarter tone. It goes, na da 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 la da dee da da and da da dee da la da 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 da. You hear that awful note, which lies in between two notes which would be in tune? It sounds as though I'm singing a terribly out-of-tune note, and maybe I am, but anyway, I am singing a note that is a real note in another musical language. In jazz, it is right at home. La da 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 da. Now, just to show you how important these blue notes are to jazz, let's hear that same blues we heard before without them, using only the plain white notes of the major scale. There is something missing, isn't there? It just isn't jazz. But even more important than the element of melody is the element of rhythm. Rhythm is the first thing you associate with the word jazz when you hear it. There are two aspects to this. The first is very simple. It's the beat. The beat is the thing you hear when the drummer's foot is beating on the bass drum, or when the bass player is plucking on his bass fiddle, or even when the pianist is kicking the pedal with his foot. So on. All this is very elementary. This beat just goes on from the beginning to the end of any jazz number, 2 or 4 of them to a bar, never changing in tempo or in meter. This we could call the heartbeat of jazz. But more involved and much more interesting is the stuff that goes on over this beat. And this is rhythmic figuration, which depends on something called syncopation. This is a word you've certainly heard of, but maybe we're never quite sure of. The best way to describe it might be as a heartbeat which goes along steadily and then, at a moment of shock, misses a beat. It is that much of a physical reaction. Technically, syncopation means either of two things: either the removal of an accent from a strong beat where it belongs, or the putting of an accent on a weak beat where it doesn't belong. In either case, the body responds to this syncopation.
This
It
is a test
compensates,
transmission,
on the one hand, for the
vk3sl.
missing accent, or else it reacts to the unexpected accent. Now, where is it we expect accents? Naturally, always on the first beat of a bar, what we call the downbeat. If there are 2 beats in a bar, 1, 2, 1, 2, it's 1 that gets the accent. That's the strong note. Just as in marching, we march 1, 2, 1, 2, or left, right, left, right. If we march left, right, we're marching in jazz, but it's not very military. Now, even if we are having 4 beats in a bar, the same thing is true. You've noticed that sergeants are always very fond of counting out marching in 4, even though we have only 2 legs. And they say, hop, 2, 3, 4, hop, 2, 3, 4. This hop is the natural accent on 1. Now, if you take it away, you have a simple syncopation. It would go this way: 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4. You see that this missing accent on the first beat evokes a body response. Now, the other way to do a syncopation is exactly the opposite: putting an accent on a weak beat where it doesn't belong. These weak beats are 2 and 4. So if this same sergeant, let's say, goes up 2, 3, 4, up 2, 3, 4, then he will be making a syncopation or counting out jazzily. Up 2, 3, 4, up 2, 4. Now, those are two ways to make syncopations, and those are the basic facts of syncopation. Now we're in a position to understand the subtler aspects of it. Every beat has between it and the next one even shorter and weaker beats. And when these get accented, the shock is even greater, because since the weaker the beat you accent, the greater the surprise. Now let's take 8 of these fast beats in a bar. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The normal beat accents will fall on the first and the fifth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now instead, we're not going to accent the fifth, we're going to accent the fourth, which is an unsuspecting little weak beat. And we'll get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Thank you, boys. Okay, thank you very much. As you see, simply by accentuating this weak fourth beat, we got a rumba. Now, obviously, the strongest syncopation of all can be obtained by doing both processes at once, accenting a weak beat and minimizing the accent on a strong beat. So in the same group of 8 fast beats, we're going to do what we did just now, put an accent on 4, but we're also going to take away completely the fifth beat, which was strong. And we will get 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8. 1. You see, it begins to sound like the Congo, doesn't it? Well, now that you understand what syncopation sounds like, let's see what that same blues would sound like without syncopation. I think you'll miss this essential element, which is, we could say, the very life of jazz. Sounds pretty square, doesn't it? Well, that takes care of 2 very important elements, melody and rhythm. But jazz wouldn't be jazz if it didn't have its own peculiar tone colors, the actual sound values that you hear. These are many, but they derive mostly from the quality of the Negro singing voice. For instance, the saxophone is almost a perfect imitation in instrumental terms of this quality. A little hoarse, breathy, and with a vibrato or tremor in it. Now, just to be clear about what a vibrato is, let's hear that saxophone again without the vibrato. Then there are all the different growls and rasps and smears that we get from putting mutes into the different horns. Here is a trumpet with a cup mute. And here is a trumpet with a wah-wah mute. And here is a trombone with a plunger mute. Then there are the colors that derive from Afro-Cuban sources, like the bongo drums, and the maracas, and the Cuban cowbell. Then we have colors that have an oriental flavor, like the plucked bass and the vibraphone. These last 2 seem to have come to us from Indian and Arab sources via Africa. So all these jazz colorations are very important too. Now let's listen to that blues without them, sung in what singers refer to as a white voice, that is, without any jazz shading. Not the real thing, is it? Now, there is one other element which may surprise some of you, who don't think jazz is an art, and that is the element of form. Did you know, for instance, that the blues was a classical form? Most people think of the blues as any song that's blue or torchy, low down, breast beating, like Stormy Weather, for instance. Well, Stormy Weather is not a blues, and neither is Moanin' Low, nor The Man I Love, nor even The Birth of the Blues itself. They are all popular songs. The blues is actually a strict, poetic form which has been transferred to music. It is based on a rhymed couplet, the first line of which is repeated. For instance, Billie Holiday sings, "My man don't love me, treats me awful mean. Oh, he's the lowest man I've ever seen." Now, when she sings this as a blues, she repeats the first line. So it goes, "My man don't love me, treats me awful mean. I said my man don't love me, treats me awful mean. Oh, he's the lowest man I've ever seen." Now, did you notice that this blues couplet is, of all things, in iambic pentameter? My man don't love me, treats me awful mean. Oh, he's the lowest man I've ever seen. This is about as classical as you can get. This means, I suppose, that you can take any rhymed couplet from Marlowe or Shakespeare and just set it to the blues and make a perfect, let's say, Macbeth blues. I will not be afraid of death and bane till Burnham Forest come to Dunsinane. It makes a charming blues. I will not be afraid of death and bane. I said I will not be afraid of death and bane till Burnham Forest come to Dunsinane. Now, if you've been very attentive, you will have noticed that each of those three lines got 4 bars apiece, making in all a 12-bar stanza. But my voice sang only roughly half of each bar, that is 2 phrases. I will not be afraid of, 2 bars, I mean, afraid of death and bane, and the rest was filled up by the orchestra. This filling up is called a break. And here we have the origin of the instrument imitating the human voice. The soil in which jazz grows. Perhaps the essential sound of all jazz would be Louis Armstrong improvising the breaks in a blues sung by Bessie Smith. From this, all instrumental improvisation has since developed. Let's listen to that sound now.
When I was nothing but a child.
And now Louis. Do you notice the instrument that is accompanying that singer and trumpeter? It is a harmonium. This wheezy little excuse for an organ that we all associate with hymn tunes. You may think it's out of place in the blues, but on the contrary, it's especially appropriate because the 3 chords that always are played in the blues, purely and simply, must always be the same 3 chords we hear in hymn tunes. And never varied. So there you have it. Melody, form, tone color, harmony. In each department there are certain features that make all this jazz instead of just music. Now let's put them all together in an all-out, full-blown, complete blues, happy blues. Did you know that blues could be happy and have happy words? Just listen.
I'm so happy I could sing and shout. I'm so happy I could sing and shout. 'Cause I'm learning, baby, what jazz is all about.
This is a test transmission from vk3sl.
Wonderful. By this time, I've probably given you the impression that jazz is all blues and nothing else. This isn't true at all. I've only used the blues to investigate jazz because it embodies the elements we've been talking about in so pure and clear a way. But actually, the rest of jazz is concerned with applying these elements to something called the popular song. Now, the popular song, a pop tune, as we say, is in a strict form itself. It has its own patterns. All popular songs are in either two-part form or three-part form. Most of them are in three-part form. This is a form that I'm sure you all know from having heard it so much. It is baby simple, and anybody can write one. Take Sweet Sue, for instance. Now, there's a song everybody knows, simple and obvious. All you need is the first 8 bars, really, which in the trade they call the front strain. They go like this. Then you just do the same thing all over again. And we've got 16 bars, so we're already half finished because the whole piece is going to be 32 bars long. Now we need a middle part or a release. This has to be a little different in music, but it doesn't have to be very good because people don't remember it too well anyhow. And then all we do is play the first front strain all over again. Sweet Sue, and there you have it. That's the whole piece, finished, 32 bars, and a classic forever. Easy, isn't it? But Sweet Sue is not yet jazz. A popular song doesn't become jazz until it's improvised on, and there you have the core of the whole problem, improvisation. Remember I said jazz was a player's art rather than a composer's. Well, it's the player who, through improvising, makes jazz out of popular songs. He uses a popular song as a kind of dummy to hang his notes on. He dresses it up in his own notes, and it comes out original jazz. And thus the popular song, in acquiring a new dress, so to speak, changes its personality, just as people do, behaving one way in blue jeans and another way in dinner clothes. Now, there are some of you who object to this dressing up and say, let me hear the melody and not all this embroidery. But it's true that if you don't accept the principle of improvisation, that is the embroidery, you can never accept or understand jazz itself. Now, what does improvising mean? It means that you keep a tune in mind with its harmony and all, and as they used to say, just go to town, or make it up as you go along. Now, going to town means that you add ornaments and figurations and furbelows of various sorts, or you can make up variations in the old-fashioned way, just as Mozart and Beethoven used to do. Let me show you a little of how Mozart did it, and then maybe you can see a little bit better how Art Tatum does it. Mozart took a nursery rhyme, which he knew as "Ah, vous dirai-je, maman," which we know as "Mama, see the tiny ducks," or as a way of singing the alphabet. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P. You all know that too. Now Mozart begins to make a series of variations, and one of them begins this way. Then another begins in a whole different way. Then there's one that goes... And then, as I recall, one begins very differently from all the others. You see, they're all different pieces, but they are all basically that same tune. Now, the jazz musician does exactly the same thing as Mozart did. There are infinite possible versions of Sweet Sue, for example. The clarinet might improvise a chorus of Sweet Sue this way. Now, he could have done that in any number of ways. If I asked him to do another chorus of it tomorrow morning, it would come out a whole different piece. But it's still Sweet Sue, and it's still jazz. Now we come to the most exciting part of the whole thing, for me at least, that's simultaneous improvisation. This happens when two musicians improvise on the same tune at the same time. Neither one knows what the other one is going to do. So they listen to each other and pick up phrases from each other and answer each other and kind of talk together. The one thing that holds them together is the chords or the harmony of Sweet Sue. And over this harmony, they each play separate melodic lines, which in musical terms creates an accidental counterpoint. This is the germ of what we know as the jam session. Now the trumpet will join with the clarinet in a double improvisation on Sweet Sue, and see if you can distinguish the two separate melodic lines. Now, this business of improvising together gave rise to the style we call Dixieland, which is currently having a big revival. Perhaps there's no sound more exhilarating in all music than that of a Dixieland band blaring out its final chorus with all stops out, everybody improvising at the same time. Here is that Dixieland chorus of Sweet Sue. 1, 2, 3. But jazz is not all improvisation, not by a long shot. Much of it gets written down, and then it is called an arrangement. The great days of arrangements were in the 30s, when big, startling swing arrangements were showing off the virtuoso bands of the time, like Benny Goodman, Artie Shaw, the Dorsey Brothers, Casa Loma, and so on. Jazz is very hard to write down. It's almost impossible to notate exactly those quarter tones we were talking about, for instance, or the various smears and growls and subtle intonations of jazz. Also, the rhythmic elements in jazz can only be approximated in notation. Therefore, much is left to the instincts of the player who is reading the music. But it seems to work because the instincts of these players are so deep and genuine. Now let's listen to, as we might have heard it back in 1938. Now remember that this arrangement was made for dancing. In 1938, we were all dancing. That brings up a very important point. Nobody seems to dance much to jazz anymore except the mambo lovers, and they're limited to those who are athletic enough to be able to do it. Can you do the mambo? I can't. Now, what has happened to dancing? It seems to me that long ago, in those days, we used to have a new dance practically every month. The Shag, the Peabody, the Lindy Hop, the Susie Q, the Big Apple, and all the rest of them. And nowadays, we are limited to dances that you have to take lessons to do. But what does this mean? It means that the emphasis has shifted to listening and away from singing and dancing. This change had to happen. First of all, with the tremendous growth of the recording industry, we have learned to listen to jazz in a way we never did before. But more important than that, with the advent of more complicated jazz like swing and boogie-woogie and bop, our interest had to shift to the music itself and away from participation. In other words, our interest shifted to the notes that were being played.
This is a
and we were
test
interested in
transmission
how
from
fast they were being played and how well
vk3sl.
and with what originality. You can't, for example, listen to bop intelligently and dance too, murmuring sweet nothings into your partner's ear. you have to listen as hard as you can to hear what's happening. So in a way, jazz has become a sort of chamber music, an advanced, sophisticated art mainly for listening. It is full of serious influences of composers like Bartók and Stravinsky. It has minor ninths and wild chords and diminished fifths and all kinds of crazy modern noises. The main thing is that it has become very, very serious. Now let's listen to a serious, modern, progressive arrangement of our old friend, Sweet Sue. Now, whether you call this weird piece cool or crazy or whatever you call it, the fact remains that it is bordering on serious concert music. In other words, the arrangement has begun to be a composition. If you take away the beat, you might not even know it's jazz at all. Why is it jazz at all? Simply because it is being played by jazz men on jazz instruments, and it has its roots in the soil of jazz and not in the soil of Bach. Now, where does this lead us in our investigation? There are those who have concluded from all this that here in this new weird jazz is the beginning, the real beginning of serious American music, and that the American composer has finally found his own expression. Of course, when they say this, they are intimating that all the symphonic works of all kinds of American composers, myself included, are nothing but stylized, personalized imitations of the European symphonic tradition. Sometimes I must say, I almost think they're right. They may have a point, but point or no point, I found myself recently in the same position, writing a concert piece for jazz band. This is the piece we referred to earlier in the session. We're going to play it for you now. It is called Prelude, Fugue, and Riffs. It's in 3 short continuous sections, a prelude for the brass alone, then a short fugue for the 5 saxophones, and then riffs for everybody. In one way or another, it uses all the elements we have been discussing during this time. I hope you will feel in it some of the special beauty of jazz that I felt when I was writing the piece. And I hope that our investigation of jazz today will help you see a little more clearly why I think of this piece as a serious piece of American music.
Well, there we go. That was Leonard Bernstein's World of Jazz, sophisticated sounds of his composition to embrace all of the musical elements. In fact, it's great to hear him use the elements of music as points of departure rather than a strictly historical narrative. I thought that was particularly effective. He had his own personal style and he was very authentic. I really enjoy these Leonard Bernstein lectures, these omnibus lectures, and there are quite a few online, so we'll pursue these further. All right, without any further ado, I will pass it on to Mr. B to finish up, and we may be back tomorrow. Not sure. We'll see what's happening. Let nature take its course. Nothing needs to be predetermined. This is vk3sl testing.